change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hi, everyone. It's Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz back for another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast, episode 43 this week, Scott. We got past 42. You took that solo, the magic number 42, my favorite number.
Really? I'm sorry that you missed out on it then. It was a good one.
I mean, you know why 42, right?
Oh, yeah. I never read that book.
Or watched the movie, the book. I never read the book either.
I don't think I ever watched the movie either.
All right. Well, if anyone's lost, anytime you see the number 42 to any real true geek, you kind of take pause because Hitchhiker's Guide for the Galaxy, essentially there's a portion in this where, well, the entire movie is kind of centered around this premise of finding the answer to all things in the universe and beyond. And they finally find the computer, the master computer, and they're able to go ask it a question. And when asked the question, what is the answer to all things in the universe and beyond? The answer undoubtedly is 42. And it's funny how often the number 42 comes up now that you see that you won't be able to unhear it. Like next time you go to like Carl's Jr. or something, you get the little like table thing. It's going to be like 42. I guarantee it. It's going to happen.
Isn't the number for like the Insights AI subcommittee is 42?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So for ISO, for the ISO committee for AI, it just so happens that that number is 42. And I thought it was kind of a joke. It's actually 42,001, but 42. So there you go for anyone who wants to just nerd up or level up their nerdiness. So we could just end the podcast now, probably.
We covered everything that we need to cover.
Right. Well, it's great to be back. Scott, you and I have been on the road in different places for a couple of weeks, actually. So that's why you took a solo one last week. I think I took one the time before that. And now we're back in action. And we thought that it'd actually be a really good opportunity to just do the things that we do. Like we talk about robots, love, and money. We talk about how to use AI to do our work better, faster, and be happier in the end. And let's do a quick debrief on essentially the types of conferences that you've been to, the trainings that you've been doing, how those have landed. I'll talk about mine. And then we can sync up because we really haven't had a chance to on where we think the sector is at in this thing that we call AI adoption.
Yep. So I was, I don't even know when, maybe a week or two ago, I was in Indiana at the AFP Kindleberger Forum, which is sponsored by our good friends at Johnson Grossnickel Associates. And it was like transformation AI and fundraising. So how do you use it? And it was these new sessions that I feel like we've both been doing where it's a little bit educational, a little bit interactive, right? Practical, kind of everybody open up your laptops. Let's walk through, screen share on how to use ChatGPT. And it's just interesting. I like being in those sessions because you hear from people who's using it, who isn't, right? How are they using it? Mm-hmm. And always come up, like I always hear new use cases, how people are doing it. There were a couple people that were there. There were probably maybe 100, 150 people there. There are a couple of people that were like the sole person in their fundraising shop. And so that's a perfect use case by itself of why you should use generative and predictive to just make the most of the resources, the limited resources you have, way more limited than what we usually see in any nonprofit shop. So I just those are incredibly energizing for me and always a good opportunity to kind of test out new tools if you're going to be teaching it, like Notebook LM, the new features of ChatGPT like Canvas, which I think we might have talked about in the last one, but always just kind of keeping your own skills up to snuff to make sure that you can talk to others about it. But you had a similar session not too long ago too, right?
Yeah, I've done a lot. I've been on the road for 3 weeks. I was home for 1 day in 3 weeks, which is, I'll tell you, not a little draining living out of an overhead suitcase because I refuse to actually check a bag. I just am totally opposed to hanging around baggage claim and waiting for a bag. So, I'm just curious actually when you're talking about that, because my observations have been similar. I get the question a lot when I'm doing a talk, where you have a Q&A portion where it's like, well, what happens if you're just a small nonprofit? And then my first response is like, well, consider yourself lucky. right? Because I think when I see innovation and when I see like deeper adoption, we could talk about the difference between using and adopting. But when I see more immersive adoption of just like, this is a tool that I'm reliant upon, this is a tool that almost becomes indispensable and intertwined with what I do, the smaller nonprofits have such an advantage because they don't have bureaucracy, they don't have to form committees, they have all these things. Like, be sure that you're using this tool safely and, consulting with people that can help you understand security and privacy. But it's almost always the small nonprofits, I think, that have an advantage. And we've talked about Dan Kershaw a bunch on here, but people like him that have one or maybe just a few people on their team, but that can use this tool and level up in pretty extraordinary ways. So if you're out there and you're thinking, well, what about me, or when's my turn? Like, this is it. Like, this is a time where you can outperform anything that you've done in the past. And to be honest, I think, again, this goes consistent with how you and I think through this. Your biggest limitation is your own creativity. Like, not your own creativity, you're on creative, maybe your curiosity. Biggest limitation is just doing it.
Yeah. So the smaller shops do have that advantage because it's kind of, you mentioned it a while ago. Trevor Noah's quote from when we saw him in Seattle, that innovation comes from necessity, right? Like, it's people who actually need a solution that are coming up with the solution. If you have a larger shop, you usually have a person that is designated to a certain role, so you don't need to rely on AI as much to get things done. But then the downside of the small shop is they don't have that like culture where they can bounce ideas off of. I would love to see like nonprofits or organizations have book clubs. I'd love to see like an AI club, right? Where everybody's meeting for like a week for just 30 minutes, say like, hey, here's what I did. How would you have done it differently? What are your thoughts? What use cases are you doing? To learn from that. And small shops just don't have that advantage unless they go to kind of these conferences where it's being talked about.
Yeah. Anne Murphy has a group of female or women leaders in AI where she gets together, I think on Saturdays, and it's become like this really cool thing where they're just sharing best practice. Because I agree, like, where there's no real rule book or even, direct the manual for ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever, that, learning from others and what they're doing is probably the best ways to accelerate your own use. It's like, oh, I never thought about that. So you and I actually, it just came to mind. You and I were at a team meeting in, I don't know, Baltimore, I think it was, or near Baltimore, with the donor search team. And we were all there and we did this very abbreviated kind of session on how to leverage generative AI, or, kind of a prompt use case kind of thing. And we put a prompt up on screen and we kind of created like a contest, like whoever could figure out how to find the answer to this question the fastest wins. And it was interesting because you and I were testing to see if people would naturally go and type that in, right, to their phone and like take what they saw on screen and type it in, type it in, type it in. And even after we had shared this, idea of like, never type a thing in ever again, just take a picture of the screen without any explanation, paste it into ChatGPT and it will read it and then give you an answer. And I don't know, that's just, again, freeing that curiosity mindset of like, just because you've always done it this way doesn't mean that you have to do it this way. And so I think for small nonprofits or even just any individual user, it's just pushing the limits and exploring on your own how much it can do and almost having it prove to you that it can't before you assume that it can't.
And I just a quick aside, I don't think I've shared this with you yet, but I've been on the Apple beta and testing out the Apple Intelligence, and they bake it in very well. I mean, it took a long time to get there, but usually you get an article or a web page, you need to copy that web page over to ChatGPT and summarize it. It's just right there. Like, it just takes that additional step out. But I was thinking, what made me think of it was new iPhone 16s that have that camera button, right? They integrate that with ChatGPT. And so if you just press it down, it opens up the lens. Like, just one less thing you have to do, right? One less step that you have to take. And it's the accessibility of that tool is just immediately there.
Yeah. Having, and this is for everyone's probably seeing this, right? Anyone who's listening is kind of seeing kind of that ubiquitous nature that AI is just being infused in everything. And I opened up Adobe PDF the other day. It was a report, Generosity Commission report. Adobe PDF opens it up in my browser, and then you have a new AI assistant inside Adobe. And instead of taking, again, like old school, like 6 weeks ago, I'd have to take that PDF, download it, put it into ChatGPT, upload it, and then ask it to summarize, right? But now with one button inside Acrobat, I could say, how many, blah, 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 did this have? And it will give me the answer. I mean, it's just to that point, the things are being integrated so quickly that most people, and I think this goes back to the adoption, that most people will say, oh, yeah, I'm using AI now. Whereas 2 years ago, it was like 5% or less. But most people say, yeah, I'm using AI. And I feel like a lot of reports talk about AI adoption being very high, faster. There was a report that came out like 2 weeks ago in Forbes and some other places that AI adoption had surpassed the internet and the personal computer, which I'm like, come on, BS. Like a personal computer, first of all, in the day, like my first IBM PS1 was like a few $1,000s, like in whatever it was, 1991 or two or something like that. So like completely inaccessible and not very usable from that perspective. So you can't compare. And then you compare AI adoption to adoption of the internet, you're also BS because like we were using the internet in like this super slow dial-up thing in prodigy.net that was like not very useful, super slow. I mean, it was painful to have to listen to that modem for like every time you had dial on and you're getting charged by the minute. So then you had to like, turn it off. So like it's not a fair comparison. So I do think that these reports on AI adoption are complete bogus BS. But I will say, because AI is now infused in everything, most people are like, oh, I use AI. Yet when you actually question them, and I usually do this by show of hands, actually I had a few sessions that I've done over the last few weeks. I'm like, how many people are using AI? Like everybody's hands go up. And then you ask like, how many are using it in a proactive strategy way? Like as part of like a deliberate strategy for what you want to achieve within your own, personal career or within your organization. And the hands quickly go down. Like, I mean, like it goes back down to like that 5% range. So we're finding use in these tools and what we consider shadow AI or whatever it's authorized or not authorized, but on the fringe. But I think there's a very big difference between use and adoption and immersion. And I think we've got a long ways to go to get to immersion.
You saying that makes me think back to years ago when we would have to pitch on predictive AI, right? And we would start with the same question: how many of you are using AI? But nobody would raise their hands, and we would have to tell them, no, you all are. So the way that it's switched completely, and now we have to say, well, you're using it different. These are different types of AI. But what is in terms of adoption, like, what is your go-to use case? Like now has become so ingrained in your day-to-day that it's like second nature for you to turn to AI for this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm always reassessing this and even myself, like continuing to find new ways to interact and kind of leverage AI to different things. So there's a couple. One is actually, you'll say I told you so in about a second, because this weekend I actually deactivated my Claude account. And I know there'll be like gasps and people like, oh my gosh, Claude is like the best thing ever. And I know like Cherry and Koshi use it a lot. Connor Grennan's a big fan. And I'll tell you, because I've been using GPT for longer. And when memory came on the scene, so essentially chat is much better at essentially assimilating to my style and understanding me. It is because I've invested more time in ChatGPT. It's outperforming Claude at like 10-1. So now when I use Claude, it feels like you don't even know me, but I'm using GPT and it does. And I would say the other reason why is that GPT released Canvas. So like with Canvas, actually two things, like two big feature updates, I think, in GPT that made me think, you know what, why am I spending this $20 a month? I still am keeping Perplexity, which I'm very close to getting rid of Perplexity as well, because of the second feature in ChatGPT. So ChatGPT comes, or OpenAI release GPT-4o with Canvas. Canvas is just like this beautiful inline editor. I mean, it's still clunky and its token limit is not as big as Claude. Claude has a much bigger context window, which means that it can remember things that are much longer. I was looking this weekend, Canvas can remember at any given session about 125,000 words. And it's somewhere around 75,000 words with ChatGPT. So it's noticeably small, but like for 90, unless you're writing a book or 99% of things that you're doing, those context windows are totally sufficient for what most people. I'm writing a 60-page report, either one are going to be fine. Canvas allows you to interact with your computer in totally different ways, where it's like, hey, I like this and I don't like this. And I have noticed that sometimes it doesn't launch into Canvas mode on its own. So if you have a paid subscription for ChatGPT and you're using GPT-4o with Canvas, you can give it a prompt and ask it for do something. And if it doesn't open in a secondary window, say like, hey, why didn't you open in Canvas? And it will say, oh, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Canvas would be a good tool for this. And so it will do that. That's number one. That kind of replaces basically like artifacts within Claude and some of that aspect of it. The second big feature you already know is GPT search, which I was prepared not to really be impressed by, because like we've had like other generative searches, and you can kind of do generative searches with OpenAI, but even, Google Gemini does generative search, but it's really good. And so now, as of a week ago, if you have the paid version, I don't know if it's for both paid or non-paid. Do you know?
I think it's just for paid.
I don't know.
I think it's coming out for free later on in the .edu accounts.
Yet another reason why you should have a paid account for privacy controls, but also for all the new features. There's a little world icon underneath where you're typing your prompt. And when you activate that little world icon, it basically is turning ChatGPT into an extremely robust search engine, which I used for like something really stupid, maybe Friday or Saturday. And then I found myself using it like 5 different times, like look up this between this and look up this between that, or why is this that way? And I think that's amazing. And I guess the third feature, that if you answer your question directly, what feature am I using the most right now, is advanced voice mode. Like sometimes you kind of feel like an idiot if you're like out in public using it, but it's freaking amazing, especially if you have earpods on and you're just like walking down an airport and you're like, hey, I have accessibility on my phone. So if I tap the back of my phone 3 times, it opens up ChatGPT. And you have the button now, because I don't have the 16 yet. I'm going to get it pretty soon. But I tap it 3 times, it opens it up. Advanced voice mode is freaking amazing. And I can already tell it's better than it was 3 weeks ago when it came out, because you can interrupt it far easier now than you could even 3 weeks ago. So it's just kind of rocking my world.
Yeah, it's funny how it changes, because I think probably when we first started this podcast, I was gung-ho on Perplexity. I like almost exclusively used Perplexity, even though I started with ChatGPT. In the past maybe month or two, it's switched. I don't even know what made it switch. It might have been when Omni came out, or what was the other one that they 4.0 and then 4 Omni, right? And so it started doing the reasoning, the advanced voice mode. Like I feel like the past couple months, they just peppered out updates left and right. And I think I took this from you, but I'm loving it. I'd feed it everything that I wrote. So it like have a Google document that's just constantly appended with my language, so that it is learning me more. And I haven't done that with Perplexity, but I think that's also leading me towards ChatGPT almost exclusively.
Yeah. I think it's something to be said for using one tool for one thing, like for lots of things. And this has been hard, I think, when you and I do a lot of public speaking. It's like, oh, I use this for this and this for this and this for this. So like, that's how it was literally up to 2 months ago. If I did search and accuracy was important, I use Perplexity. If I would do, writing originally, it would be for Claude. But to your point, if you can use one tool that is, multimodal, meaning it has lots of different modes, like I can speak to it, it can speak to me, I can send it an image and it can translate it. All those things. And I don't even know if I told you a story. So this is like one of my personal favorite use cases of ChatGPT that literally kind of saved me, is that I got picked up in Orlando airport on Sunday night. It was like 8:00 or something like that. It was dark, at whatever point it was dark. The driver picks me up and I noticed the Uber driver. So it's kind of sketch to begin with, because he shows up and half of his windshield is busted in. I'm like, oh brother, like what am I getting into? I didn't look at the ratings. And I get in the car, pulls out and spins around the airport, pulls out to where the freeway divides left and right. His GPS goes down, like completely, like little spinning thing. And he tries to say something, realize that he doesn't speak any English, like no English, speaking Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. So I'm like, we are truly at an impasse, like literally and figuratively. So imagine this, it's dark. We're in the middle of the freeway and it curves one to the right, one to the left. We are at the fork in the road. He pulls into the middle. While cars are flying by, both right and left. Like we pull in the middle and he stops the car. And he's like, no Inglés, no Inglés. I'm like, no Español. And I'm like, what do we do? He's like, I don't know where to go. Like basically I could tell the frantic nature of this. And so I pull up my phone and I literally I hold it up in the air and I said, I am in an Uber. The driver only speaks Spanish. I only speak English. Can you translate everything I say to Spanish and have him repeat back? And so it does. And then all of a sudden he just starts speaking Spanish. Like as soon as it translates to him, he's just like my GPS went down. I don't know where to go. Can you cancel your Uber ride and set up a new Uber ride with the address so that it will reload? And I was like, sure. And like literally problem solved in like 45 seconds. So what was something that was super stressful, like I'm thinking I may never
Yeah.
make it, like this is not going to go well. It actually ended up being like kind of mind-blowingly easy. And that's where I guess goes back to my advanced voice mode thing, which is just, it's the translation part is amazing.
Yeah, I haven't used it all that much, but again, I think part of it is because I don't have that. I'm not on the road as much as you are. I don't have that commute, so I don't have that opportunity. So much easier for me to just type, and I think I've been used to it. But when I have used it, I've been incredibly. I just wish that you
Yeah.
could upload documents and then use advanced voice mode on those documents.
Soon. I've been in the thing of canceling subscriptions. This week I canceled my subscription to Speechify. And this just goes again to like what our expectations are as consumers. So Speechify is a tool where I've been a fan for a long time. Like before I wrote my book, I had Speechify. Speechify is a tool. It's one of the early AI human voice tools where you can load a PDF or a Word document and it can read it to you. But it can read it to you in Gwyneth Paltrow's voice or Snoop Dogg's voice or Mr. Beast's voice or just a lot of generic voices. But to be honest, I became so tired of the clunkiness with it. It's slow. It takes a little, like, it doesn't sound natural. And so I've gotten very quickly used to advanced voice mode and how fluid it is. Like the fluidity of it is just ridiculous. You can interrupt it. It just sounds like a human. And you can ask it to whisper. You can ask it to change its accent, all the different things it does. And Speechify very quickly became dumb to me. Like it just became like, this is basic. Like Siri and Alexa are like not even basic, they're like archaic. Like they feel like they're from the Stone Ages. So I cannot listen to Siri or Alexa anymore. So I canceled Speechify knowing that this will all come and you can have it read documents and things like that with advanced voice mode. And I do have an account with 11 Labs. So if I ever really get desperate, I use 11 Labs for that. But all that to say, I think the blend, which will segue nicely into our next topic, the blend between human, cyborg and centaur, Ethan Mollick's kind of analogy is becoming closer and closer, like harder and harder to kind of understand.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I've done a couple of sessions with live sessions and trainings at conferences, and a lot of times I'll hold up my phone, like when I was in the Netherlands. I said, "Can you welcome everybody, in Danish?" And it just did, and people are like, their jaw goes down, and it's just like, it's just amazing. But I do think that when we're talking about this infusion, the idea of like character AI and, Esquire did an article this week about men falling in love with their AI bots and why they prefer those AI bots over female relationships that they were in or other just relationships, period, they were in. And then to that young, 14-year-old boy, Sul Garcia, who took his life because he had fallen in love with a character AI bot. While there's tremendous like power in this to do work better, faster, and be happier, it doesn't come without, a significant, warning label that should be on these things, that use them in moderation with a clear mind.
Yeah, there was a quote in the podcast from Center for Humane Technology that Your Undivided Attention, where they they played the interview of the woman who interviewed Sewell's mother, right? Again, this 14-year-old who took his life after falling in love with a chatbot. And one of the quotes in there was not from the mother, but talking to kind of this generation of people building these products, that you're not coding a future product, you're coding future human civilization.
Right.
New generations are growing up with this as just a part of their life, right? They're going to be thinking about like the AI from their childhood, like you think about using modems, right? And it's going to be so involved and deeply ingrained in what they're doing. Like this is going to be their life moving forward. And so it's not just let's race to get a product out there so that we can beat the market and make a ton of money, but how do we do this again with everything we talk about, like ethically, responsibly, and beneficially, so that it has that ultimate good?
Yeah, in absence of really any real regulation. So, I think this is a good, way we can end this podcast and say, look, like we come at this from a super optimistic perspective. Like we see the power of these tools to amplify mission, to help support you in your career, And no matter what your job is, if you don't know how to use AI, to benefit your work, all you have to do is ask it. And this seems profound. Like it seems stupid, but it's profound. And people are like, oh, wow, I haven't done that yet. But always, always, always understand that responsible AI is everyone's responsibility. And I believe that these are the in-between years. Like when I was raising my kids, the in-between years are with the advances in social media. And we as parents didn't know how to navigate it. And we made lots of mistakes. And this generation is much smarter because of that understanding. And the same exact thing is true right now as essentially bots and robots become lifelike. And how do we navigate that? And what does that future generation look like? Hopefully, we're carrying the wisdom of what we learned with social media into this new technological revolution. But that's our job, to get on this podcast and talk about that, share the pros and the cons, the promise and the peril. And we'd love to hear from others that are having similar experience as well.
So with that, thanks everybody for listening. Another episode of Fundraising AI Podcast. Let us know what you want to hear about next, what you like, what you don't like, how we can be of help to you. Again, we're just a resource for you.
Yeah. And if you hate it, we're just going to keep on doing it. So I don't know. I think we've shown our resistance to, any criticism at this point. We'll call it resolved. All right, everyone. Yeah. Thanks for all you do for the world and for the future generations. And we look forward to talking with you again soon. Take care, everyone.